Footy Frothies, a special episode. Daggy and Oli here, along with prominent Australian author Alan Whittaker. Rugby League and true crime predominantly, Al.
Gentlemen, it's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. We had a brief chat at the book launch back at the end of last year.
We did.
And we just thought we'll have some time to sit down and spend an hour or so and have a proper chat this time. How's things? How are you enjoying the footy season so far?
Well, Panthers are on top, so it doesn't get much better, does it? But I think you guys, as students of the game, can see that the competition's splitting already. You know, you've got your top six, and then you've got the rest. And as long as Penrith's in the top six and competitive with the top six, then I think we'll have a good season.
Yeah. Well, they've done it's a debate we've had, actually. We'll already go down a tangent, but it's a debate we have about expansion and the actual talent pool right now. Do you think essentially talent's an issue, roster management? What?
Roster management, I think, is the big issue. A lot of clubs are coming up short now. And it's not to say that good players aren't out there. I was talking to Oli off air just before we started talking. You know, you look at a guy like Momorowski, you know, where did he come from? You know, Melbourne bench. So given opportunities, there will be the players there to plug the gaps. But clubs have to be very canny now to handle their roster, manage their roster. Penrith seem to have got it right. We're in a very sweet spot at the moment. But, you know, God forbid we're successful and a few of these young blokes become test stars. How do you hang on to all of them? I think we're in a good place because we know the ones we want to keep and they're young. So we're planning, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ahead. But for the new clubs, well, then having 18 competitive clubs, you know, it's probably going to be split even further. You're going to have teams that will struggle every year. And, you know, you look back on history, Canberra were easy beats when they came in. Illawarra were flogged. Probably the only team that just started off up and running was Melbourne. Brisbane didn't make the semis the first couple of years they played. They didn't get the balance right. So, I'm not against it. I think it'd make it interesting. But, talent management is the issue.
Well, you bring up a Melbourne Storm when they started up. I believe, was it John Revo who was involved with them? And I guess they were sort of set up to succeed. That was the thing that the NRL wanted. If a Melbourne club was going to come in, they had to be relatively successful straight away, and they won a premiership in their second season. It seems like this same sort of mentality will be the driving force for this new Brisbane club. And I guess for the 18th club as well, do you think with these new clubs coming in, the NRL will want them to be set up for success, let's just say, within their first 5 years or so?
Sure. But this is the problem. When the Titans came in 2007, they made the semis the first year. From memory, they made it the second year, and then they just went down and they were wooden spooners within 5 years. And this is the problem if you put all your guns up front. You know, you put a side in of experienced journeymen that you can attract to your club. When those players go, do you have the young players coming through? The problem with Melbourne, and Melbourne probably have the most to lose because Melbourne have effectively been the second Brisbane side for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they've been, they've had that feeder club up there. I think it's North's Brisbane that have been their feeder club, and they've been really, really successful. So if a second Brisbane club comes in, that's going to take a lot of their talent pool out as well. And Melbourne have shown that they haven't been able to develop Victorian talent. They can't do it. So I think that's something the league has its eye on. It's not about Brisbane not being competitive. It's about Melbourne not being competitive. It's just as big an issue.
Yeah, and we have people write in a lot and tell us how much talent there is in Queensland Cup and the like. And
for sure.
But we just obviously don't see it. Obviously, the Cowboys roster isn't as strong as it'll be. I guess for a new expansion team coming in, it's almost like a clean slate's better than better than if you're offered 500 at the Bombers or whatever, the Dolphins, whatever they may be. That's better than trying to go to Manly and on 500 and you know what you're walking into on paper.
You won't get 500 at Manly.
Well, and that's the first issue.
A lot of players, and Phil Gould used to say this too, that it's like Christmas Day for players when clubs were being set up because you play overs.
Yeah.
You pay overs.
You want a marquee, you want two marquees, whatever you want. Yeah.
And we've got to have a side. Yeah. You can't have club players or New South Wales Cup players. You've got to have some talent. So that's probably when a lot of managers are rubbing their hands together. But look, it's very hard. I asked Roy Simmons this when Super League happened. I was doing a book with Royce, and I said, do you think a 20-team comp would have worked? Because the first NRL comp was a 20-team comp, I think, in '98, and then it went down to 16, down to 14. Yeah. And he said if they'd persevered with it and given it time, it would have, because players would have risen to that level. So taking his advice, I would say yes, an 18-team comp can win if it's given time. The Crushers, they had money in the bank. They were going well, but they were just sacrificed at the table of a united competition. Yeah. So you don't want a second Brisbane side folding after 3 years. You don't want a second New Zealand side dying after, say, 5 years. Yeah. They've persevered with the Titans, and the Titans seem to have... I thought the Titans would have folded 4 or 5 years ago, actually. They've persevered.
Essentially, the NRL refused to allow it, didn't they? They stepped in.
And to their credit, they backed them. They put management in there. I think Annesley went up there. Yep. And now they are really part and parcel of that stretch of land from the Gold Coast to up that Palm Beach area, away from Brisbane, and they've got their own identity. And the league just have to back it. So they wouldn't be bringing them in if it wasn't going to work.
I think that the problem with I was thinking about this the other day with the have-nots, let's call them this year, is that fans, you got board members who don't necessarily follow the game maybe as closely as even probably as closely as we do. They're on a board with other jobs and whatever else. Coaches are only ever given 2 years. Fans demand an instant response, so they're not willing to accept a 5-year plan. Penrith did it, and look, at the end of the day, we've got to give them some credit. Yeah. But I guess Canterbury aren't willing to just say, no, we're going to run 14th for the next 5 years. And maybe the wheel's starting to turn for Canterbury. There's maybe hope there. But by the time you try and set up a structure, the coach is already on the outer, and the next one's in, starting all over again. We see that seems to be the theme for a lot of these have-nots.
I think fans are patient. I think fans...
Well, fans are. And I think they're long-suffering.
You have to be. Oh, long-suffering. Well, imagine being a Penrith supporter in the 70s. Yeah.
I'm a Tigers supporter now.
Well, and things go with cycle. Who would have thought 5 years ago that Manly would be on the bottom and 0
or
from
Brisbane,
4?
I suppose. So.
Well, nobody had ever envisaged that Brisbane, they might have a bad season, but wooden spooners, can't imagine that. Yeah. So I think the true fan and the true rugby league, tragic, will wear 4 or 5 seasons of below par performances, and this is where Canterbury's at the moment. If they know that something is happening, something is coming. So Burton's coming next year. They should build a side around 3 or 4 players. Flanagan looks like he's finding his feet there. If they can build a side that, starts winning more than they can losing, they'll make the semis, and then they can, as we found out last year, making the semis is good enough for a lot of teams, but that doesn't mean you're going to win a premiership.
No, that's right. And some of those are just they're straight sets teams. They're going to finish 6th, but Penrith or Melbourne, they put them straight out.
Well, the last club to win a premiership from outside the top 4 was Canterbury in 1995, I'm pretty sure. So before the NRL era, so it's never happened in this era. So I guess to a point that you keep bringing up, Daggy, in terms of, I guess, the talent pool and how close the competition is, it's really not as close, I guess, as people think, because we haven't had a team win the comp from outside the top 4 since 95. Yes, you can point to Parramatta of 09 or the Cowboys of 17 and say they got there, but at the end of the day, they didn't get the job done. Just a point you brought up before, Alan, as well, and you were talking about clubs paying overs for players. Manly Warringah, they've got DC on a mill, they got the Travojevic brothers on a mill. Those are 3 players, the Cowboys, Holmes, Morgan, who might be medically retired, on a mill, and Taumalolo. The 2 clubs who have 3 players on at least $1 million a year are the 2 worst clubs, arguably, in the competition right now. So that just proves your point, I guess.
Well, it does. And, that was an entirely disorganised process when Cherry Evans, was going to the Gold Coast on $1 million, and then he flipped to take 1.2 with his original club. That should have been handled much, much better, Bob Fulton was in charge, or Ken Arthurson was in charge, or somebody was in charge, rather than a private enterprise trying to get a quick fix. Yeah. they would have realised that if you pay a player 1.2 over, say, 5-6 years, that's eating into your salary cap, and you can't buy those 200,000 and 300,000 a year players who are going to augment him. So I think he's got 2 more years, hasn't he?
I think so.
Two more years, and they can't go into the market because they're maxed out.
Oh.
So Canterbury got themselves into trouble. Penrith got themselves into a bit of trouble. Clubs can do that if they don't think ahead. And this is where I applaud South Sydney, who are playing tough ball with Adam Reynolds.
Yeah.
They've been burnt. We're going to play it by year. We're going to give you 12-month contracts like they did to John Sutton. And, there's nothing sadder than a 32-year-old halfback running around on one leg.
Yeah.
So, you've got to be tough. You've got to be mentally tough. They're doing it right. Many other clubs aren't doing it right. They haven't got their roster right. And, better judges than me, Phil Gould and Brad Fittler and, guys on Fox Sports say the same thing week in, week out. Look at their roster.
Yeah. And I guess East are the one doing it right, and that they've set up a culture where players are happy to stay for that maybe 50 grand less when you go across 17 blokes. In theory, let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
Why are they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you go across 17 blokes, adds up to whatever it adds up to.
There are a lot of urban myths about that East that I won't delve into. Only to say is that you're right.
Yeah.
I can't believe that some players are so gullible. And I use a player that I got a lot of affection for, Tyrone Peachey. Tyrone Peachey was coming off at the bench at Penrith, and he probably didn't like that. But Tyrone is not an 80-minute player. He probably is now. But at the time, he was making a real impact, a real match winner off the bench. His manager organised a big contract in the Titans, and he's gone to an underperforming club. I didn't even know Tyrone Peachey was playing the other week.
Yeah.
And I saw him do a couple of clever things, and I thought, oh, that's great, Tyrone's. But, 3 years ago, he had the world at his feet. Now he's playing for a club that gets no press down here. He's not being spoken about, the great thing that he does. Yes, the Titans are in top 8 contention, and that's great. But he's not a standout player. With the Panthers, and when we were playing well, when we were making the semis with Matty Moylan and those players, Tyrone Peachey was the gun. Yeah. So this is what players...
And he was loved. Like all the Panthers fans.
Had a lot of affection.
Ended up playing Origin 2 in his last year at Penrith, didn't he?
He was a non-playing... yes, he played one Origin. Yeah. And he was a non-playing kangaroo for Mal Meninga.
Yeah.
He and Regan Campbell-Gillard. But the point is that players and managers need to say to themselves, do I want to take more money with a struggling club or stay where I am on unders and be in a club that are getting all the press? Because, a lot of them cut their own throats in chasing the money. And I get it. They've got 10 years. They've got to get a really top contract. But at some point, they've got to look after the money. I don't know too many managers. I wouldn't want to be one. I wouldn't want to know too many of them. They're looking after themselves. They're trying to get the best for their players, but they've brought many an undisciplined club undone, chasing players. And as long as we have the salary cap, and fine, we've got the salary cap, but as we know, the salary cap does not even out the competition.
Yeah, that's
used to. But now player managers manipulate it, clubs manipulate it, players manipulate it.
Yeah, player managers with coaches who are managing coaches as well manipulate it.
Well, I guess that's where me and Adrian have disagreed on the whole talent pool situation, because he's been firm in saying that the talent pool isn't big enough for 18 teams. I believe it is, but the problem is all the talent are at a few clubs. It's not distributed evenly. Because
players want to play with a successful club.
Yeah.
And if I'm playing for East, and East always make the top 4, well, then I'm going to take unders. See, look at Penrith now. Penrith have their marquee players, and they're bringing in fringe players who are slotting in really well, but they're not on big money.
And then your Spencer Linus and your Leotas of the world are happy to stay here and just live where they've grown up, be part of the crew they've grown up with, and play for 400,000, put a roof over their heads, and be happy.
And getting back to your point about the Roosters is that Roosters players don't play where they grew up because they've got no juniors.
Exactly.
So they've got to recruit very well. They're also very ruthless. They got rid of Kyle Flanagan pretty ruthlessly last year. And people will say, well, he's finding his feet at Canterbury. Maybe they did the right thing, but it's a pretty ruthless business, as you know.
Also incredible that Roosters are able to get rid of someone so easily when other clubs
Because
Can't.
well,
But
Canterbury,
Yeah.
they snap up anybody because they want.
Yeah.
They want to get some talent in there.
Yeah. Let's go back through. Let's go back to the start with I guess the Penrith team growing up in a growing rugby league community in Penrith. I guess take us back to how that was, and we've got old man Ollie's here as well. He was part of that with you, but
Paddy,
the growth of Penrith, I guess from the start, your own footy story, I guess, from being a kid.
Well, the great thing about growing up in Penrith is that, and I may have said this before, so I'll try and say it differently, but Penrith was a country town when we were growing up. Where I lived on Parker Street with my parents, had their house for 50 years. It was a dirt road. And now it's a 6-lane highway.
Yeah.
So many people came to Penrith because they loved the country town feel. And when Penrith had a viable rugby league community here before 1967, and then the league, not so bravely or smartly, I think they had to be dragged kicking and screaming. They promoted Penrith, and we were the fringe Sydney Basin team.
Is it true that it came down to Penrith and Cabramatta?
No, Wentworthville.
Sorry, I knew it was one of the Parramatta clubs, yeah.
And that would have been a disaster for Parramatta.
Yeah.
Now, Penrith, because we were further out from Parramatta and we had a very viable competition here, we got the nod. And that started, I suppose, the ball rolling for a whole generation of young people like myself who, on any given Saturday or Sunday, could go down and see this wonderful drama unfold. And in those days, 4-tackle rule, as I saw it in 1968, first game that I went to, I still remember it. And it was very much a man-on-man game. You had 4 tackles. There was probably a little bit too much kicking, far too many scrums, far too many penalties. But it was a very skillful and dramatic game. I just got hooked, just coming down with my dad and my brothers and sisters and sitting on the hill. Yeah. It was great. And, your expectations weren't that high because, every now and then, maybe once a month, we'd have an upset. But the other 3 weeks, we'd get, belted or flogged. Or it is often the case we were desperately unlucky because we just didn't have, not that we didn't have good players, we had great players, we had players who played above their weight and tried their hardest, but we didn't have that match winner. We didn't have that I suppose, spark. We had just had a team that on its day could cause a big upset. The other thing, the psychology of coming out to Penrith in those days, there was no M4. You had to come up the Great Western Highway. So you imagine South Sydney. Yeah. They would have had to have left Cleveland Street, a good 9 o'clock in the morning. By the time they get out here, they've had 500, stop signs, 500 sets of lights. Are we here yet? Are we here yet? Penrith in the 1960s was on the outskirts of Sydney, as it still is today. But the roads were not fantastic, People used to make jokes all the time, you live in Penrith, you have to put your watches back and all that sort of stuff. Hillbillies, country folk. And we didn't mind that. But the psychology of those sides coming out here, many of them were exhausted before they even got off. And they didn't have tour buses or anything like that. They all came out individually. They brought their families out. Then a couple of sides started getting smart and maybe staying overnight. Of course, the club would get them on the beer the night before and wine and dine them and look after them. And, how good is this? And can't believe how long has this been happening? And then they'd wake up the next day and get belted again. Yeah. So it was good. It was good. And it was probably, a great life lesson not to have a winning side. You learnt to be humble, you learnt to be patient, you learnt not to have too high expectations. But when it happened, boy, was it exciting. You'd go to school and everyone would be buzzing, We used to laugh, when we were teenagers and that. The people that would go off to work on a Monday because their team beat St George or South Sydney.
Yeah.
The boys got up. It was just totally infectious. So that got me hooked.
So I want to jump a few years into the future, actually. You bring up, I guess, the down period of Penrith. When they first came into the comp, they weren't a very successful club. 1985, Penrith make their first final series. I believe they actually beat Manly Warringah in the first week of the finals. That's usually replayed on Fox a fair bit. What changed as a Penrith supporter, as someone living in Penrith, what changed in the town and what changed at the club, I guess, for them to actually be successful in 85 and then, of course, eventually go on to make the grand final in 90 and win it in 91? What had changed about Penrith, I guess, the club and the town for that to happen?
Well, what happened was, and I've just written about this because we were talking off air before, I'm doing another book with Tony Loxley, publisher, who did League on Sunday, Work on Monday. We're doing a book on the 80s, and I actually wrote a chapter on this just recently. The success that Penrith had in the mid-80s, three things happened. The Leagues Club took over the running of the football club. So in just like Canterbury, today, they were two separate entities.
Yep.
So that was a position of a lot of infighting, you know, a lot of jealousy with the board, a lot of backstabbing, board members telling players you're the best, you know, getting in people's ears, trying to run the club. So the other thing was a lot of wasted money, you know. So for all through the 70s, Penrith wasted money chasing big players, chasing coaches that didn't work. And so, you know, to his credit, Roger Cowan at the Lees Club said, you know, that's it. You know, we've had 15, 16 years since 1967. We've had no success. Never made a semi-final, never won a premiership, obviously, and never had a test player after 17 years. Yeah. So he said, that's it. We'll bring it all under one umbrella, and we're going to look after things from the administration side, streamline everything. That was the first thing that they did that got Penrith back on track. Yeah. The second thing they did was they asked Tim Sheens to come back to the club as coach. Yeah. So Tim Sheens was a long-serving player, played a lot of reserve grade, wasn't a big forward, just a very good club player, had a good ball game, wasn't an enforcer, but was a very smart footballer. Yeah. They cut him at the end of 82, and he went out to Campbelltown and won the Group 6 competition out there.
Okay. I was going to ask where he came from, So back from
he's a Penrith boy. He grew up here.
Yeah. He was coaching at Campbelltown.
But he was captain coach at Campbelltown and won the premiership there, and they said, let's bring Tim Sheens back as coach because he knows the culture. Then the third thing and the most important thing was a player called Greg Alexander was graded. And I can't say this, you know, Brandy doesn't need me patting him on the back or whatever, but history will show that Greg Alexander was the first match winner that we had come through. Yeah. You know, we had good players before him. We had Kevin Dan, great player. Roy Simmons, you know, hard worker. Brad Izzard, you know, really dynamic player. But we had no on-field general that could bring the whole side together. Yeah. And in the flick of a switch, win a match by themselves. You know, some of the things I saw Brandy Alexander do in 84, 85, 86, you know, were just unbelievable. You know, his ability to chip kick, scoop up a ball one-handed, his swerve, his step, goal kicking from the side. And he was in an era of very, very good halfbacks. And he was just brilliant. So by building a team around him, Penrith started winning. So in 84, they had to win the last game at Penrith Park against the defending premiers, Parramatta of all people, to make the semis, and we got beat. But 20,000 people showed up, standing room only, and Penrith had learnt to win. The next year, we built on that, and they defeated Manly in a midweek playoff at the SCG, which I went to with a couple of friends. It was history in the making. We won that 10-7. May have even been extra time. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's one of the games that's on Fox a fair bit.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Manly Penrith.
It was 7-all full time, and we won it after a period of 10 minutes extra time. The problem is that we were knackered by the time. We had it front up against Parramatta on the Monday. On the Saturday, and we got belted. Yeah. So Penrith learnt, that's what it took. But it took Penrith another 5 years to become semi-final winners. You know, we'd be on the edge, on the cusp in the late 80s. And then in 1989, we finished second, had a great year under Ron Willey. We had Brad Fittler coming through. We had local juniors, John Cartwright, Matty Geyer, and, of course, Brad Izzard, as I said before, coming through. So that's when it all fell into place. But to go to that next level of becoming grand finalists, you can't underestimate the role Phil Gould came
Yeah.
in this coach, because he'd won a premiership with Canterbury. Yes, he was a tough character. Yes, he was prickly. Yes, he wanted his own way. But Gould was a winner. And he galvanised that side. We made the grand final in 1990, and the next year, history proved that we'd come a long way from that mid-'80s.
Take us through, I guess, what that meant for Penrith and the town 91 itself. We've had Royce on the show. He's a tremendous storyteller.
A legend, Royce.
So
Just a legendary guy. And he said it when he held the trophy up. He said, this is for the people of Penrith. Oh no, that was Greg Alexander.
Yeah.
On the sideline, I asked him, what does this mean? He goes, well, it means we're somebody.
Yeah.
And that was it. We were no longer the Easy Beats. We're no longer the Chocolate Soldiers. We were no longer the joke of the competition. Yes, we had been all those things in certain years. But, I look back to my son, Tim, who's 35 now. But he was 5 years old in his first year of school.
Yeah.
And then in his HSC year, Penrith won it in 2003.
Yeah.
So his whole school life was bookended by 2 premierships. So his mindset, being a Penrith supporter, was completely different to my mindset, where we won nothing in 8 years when I was at school.
Yeah.
And we'd go to school on a Monday morning and we'd just lament, what are we going to do? You had to be a Penrith supporter. And plenty of people opted out. Plenty of people growing up wanted to be a St George supporter or a Manly supporter or a South Sydney supporter because they were the winners. The tried and true, many of your listeners, you're born and bred. The residential qualification rule, you're Penrith.
Well, we are. Well, I started, I think I spoke to you about it last time, but I went to school just up the hill here, and the Fittlers are in the back, literally lived across the road. So they'll be come over and kick the balls with us at lunchtime. They'd be always a feature of school, the guys, and or Freddie, or to a lesser extent the Alexanders. We had a whole service for Ben when that happened. So it was just 03 obviously was different. Obviously I was again graduating high school. So how was 03 in comparison for you? And that completely different team obviously. And
03 was a pleasant surprise because you guys would know, your rugby league, that we finished last in I think 01.
Yeah.
Yes.
Royce got sacked.
Yeah.
And that was a funny year because we had a very good side that year. The year before we'd done very well. Made the semis with Ryan Girdler and all those players.
Yeah.
Nothing went right in 01 for some reason. Whether the players lost confidence or Royce lost confidence or whatever, but he was the fall guy. So with Richardson and Leng coming out, the Cronulla connection, they'd had a bit of success. And I remember interviewing them both before the start of the year in 02. There was no expectation. No, we just, and there are some hard lessons to be learnt in 02. They sacked a few players and fired them up and said, good people are paying their money and you're dishing up rubbish. So when 03 came along, it was just a pleasant surprise. I think we lost our first game or the second game. No, we lost the first 2 games. We were last on the premiership, 100-1. And then we started winning. And what I always thought about the 03 game, the 03 season, was that that was when our interchange bench won it for us. I thought we had a very well-balanced interchange bench. And that was when the interchange, after about 5 or 6 years, was becoming a pivotal part of the game. So I think we got our bench right, and we had fantastic halfback. And also Gower got shifted from hooker to halfback. Yep. Ryan Girdler, even though he was a couple of years past his best, had a great season. We had Muscle up front. Reece Wesser was scoring tries all over the place.
25 tries, I think.
Still holds the record for a fullback. Our wingers, Lukey Lewis, Luke Rooney. It was just a really well-balanced side. And it was wonderful. Yeah, I loved it. We probably should have won a premiership 5 years ago to get that 10-year balance.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, and we made the final, didn't we? We got beat by Canterbury in the final. We probably should have won that. I don't know if we would have won that year.
14 in the prelim against Canterbury.
That was South Sydney's year, and they deserved that premiership.
Yeah.
But that side was good enough to win a premiership. And then we've had to go through a few reconfigurations now. So if it happens this year, I'll be pleasantly surprised again. But as as a Penrith supporter, you know, from 1968, that's 53 years. You know, they don't come along very often.
Yeah.
2 out of 53.
Yeah.
You know, we're due one now. That'll be 3 out of 53.
Yeah.
So you just got to take them and enjoy them.
Yep. I just wanted to bring up 2020 quickly because you talk
Right.
about the town of Penrith, well, the season in general, because you talk about the town of Penrith in 91 and 03. I look at 2020, and I've always been a rugby league fan growing up, so it didn't really have too much an impact on me, but I have just plenty of mates who aren't even rugby league fans. They now go down to the pub every week whenever Penrith are playing and watching because of 2020. And I know heaps of people. I'm just sort of looking at it from my generation's point of view, I guess, because I guess 2020 would be my generation's year, if not 2021. And I used to notice going to Penrith games, and I would see through friends on social media, I'd see at the game, it was a social event, whereas sort of people my age, they'd get together with their friends, they'd go to the game, but they wouldn't actually watch the game, they'd just muck around and stuff, and you'd see that a lot with the younger generations.
I noticed half a dozen mates who don't follow Penrith, but are Penrith members.
Yeah.
Just because they go to every game. Yeah.
But the thing is now, I see people my age and a bit younger in high school, guys and girls going to Penrith games, and they're actually watching, cheering on. You know, I know plenty of people who wouldn't have known any NRL player's name at the start of last year, and now they know the Panther side back to front, and they watch every game. And I guess winning, that's all it is, winning.
It doesn't
Winning helps.
Doesn't take much, does it?
Yeah.
The thing is that what people don't appreciate, it's a little bit different now because of restrictions and whatever, but you know, I can remember when my daughter was 14 and 15, and that'd be, you know, almost 20 years ago. She loved it like I loved it because all your mates were down there. She'd have her girlfriends, and then they'd meet, you know, boys from other schools and sit and talk and whatever. That social dynamic with Penrith is very important. And my son, you know, stands on the hill. I stand with him now. I gave up my seat in the grandstand a couple of years ago. But the same 5 or 6 young guys are always there. We have a great joke. We have, you know, I'm 62-ish now, and 5 of my mates come and stand beside us as well. So we have that generation as well. So that collegiality, being part of the rugby league community, is very, very important. And Penrith have done it very well. You know, it's great seeing families on the family hill. It's great seeing young kids running around. You know, I was desperately disappointed when they built the Chairman's Lounge on the hill. You know, used to slide down the back of the hill. You know, they've done that for 40 years.
The two tragedies of that, and when they got rid of the Parramatta Hill. Parramatta Hill was just for sitting, was just the right angle for sitting on. It was a great hill, and they put
Unfortunately, it's progress, but getting to and Penrith's very lucky. Like, I'm sure, and I'm sure this was done, but I'm sure that if somebody did some research about how much money having a rugby league team brings into Penrith, either through membership of the club, or even just rival teams coming here on that night and eating up here and whatever, it's worth millions to Penrith.
Yeah.
So we don't want ever to lose that. Penrith is a rugby league town, always will be a rugby league town, and you know, it's great that young families that now live out here, you know, Penrith's just wall-to-wall houses now, you know, gone, all the market gardens are gone and all the land's gone, but it is great that they've got someone to cheer for.
It's crazy to think that back in '67, at the time I believe the NSWRFL were considering Penrith or Wentworthville. You would think Penrith would be the easy choice between those two towns, especially with Parramatta already in the comp, right? Like, could you imagine if they had gone with Wenty? They would not be around today.
Well, I guess essentially when, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I wasn't around, but essentially when it was a Sydney-based comp, it probably made sense just for another team 10 minutes up the road.
They had a very powerful leagues club, and they still have a very powerful league club, Wenty. And they put a lot of money into that local community. But I think Parramatta actually got edgy about this. You know, they didn't mind losing Penrith because Penrith was part of the Parramatta competition. Yeah. But they couldn't afford to lose Wentworthville right next door to them. Yeah. So I think they secretly got behind it as well. The league are not known for audacious moves. Yeah. And I think that was a good one that they brought Penrith in. You know, Penrith Park was a cow paddock with a fence around it. Yeah. We had a grandstand without a roof, you know, held 100 people. The change rooms, not that I ever got invited into them, were, like a public toilet, cold showers. They told me that the first club secretary, Merv Cartwright, he lived at St Mary's, and many of the players would go back to Merv's place and have a shower back there.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because
That's a hot water.
even the visiting players would go back there and have a shower at
Yeah.
Merv's, and then stay there and have dinner and have
Yeah.
a big party, because they knew they'd get a hot shower, unlike Penrith. But, from humble beginnings, here we are. We've got a very viable competition, and, hats off to the Penrith Leagues Club, and hats off to Gould for rescuing the sports centre of excellence.
Yeah.
And hats off to the local community for getting behind it, because those players are now very well looked after. They've got great facilities. That wasn't always the case.
And lastly on Penrith, how important it's been, I guess, the expansion west, or the scouting west to the Penrith's success in terms of, Forbes, Ferrari, and I believe Naden's from...
There's a couple from Dubbo, I believe. Isaiah
Dubbo boys,
Dubbo.
and there's some
Bathurst.
other in Bathurst.
Yeah.
So.
Look, it's very important for Penrith, because Penrith has always been a favourite of New South Wales country people, because we're close to the country.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense to promote kids. The problem is, in the old days, they used to have city versus country, and the country people would come down, and then you go, oh, he's a good player, he's a 25-year-old goal kicker. If you're any good now, by the age of 18...
You're in a system.
You're in a system, and you're in the city anyway. So that's why city country's a joke, and they got rid of it.
Yeah.
But what Penrith are doing, they're putting money into education and signing up 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds and putting them back home.
Yeah.
There's no point bringing 15-year-olds to Penrith and corrupting them. Keep them there, keep an eye on them. And it does hurt when players like Matt Burton go to another club, because Penrith have had so many years of developing the kid.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is a good thing. You can't. We've proven you can't have 5 halfbacks in a side.
Yeah.
We're just very, very lucky that at this time we've got a plethora of great halves. But what they're doing, investing in education and kids in the local area, we got Yo from Forbes, I think, and we've got Naden, and we've got other players coming through. Where did Edwards come from? He came from out there.
He's from, I think, south. Might be. No, he's out that way. I can't remember.
Yeah, out west somewhere.
He's out west.
So,
essentially, most of the backline is bar the Colton boys, I suppose. Or
and Staines.
Yeah, and
Staines
Staines,
Bathurst boy, isn't he?
Yeah.
Fantastic management, and not so surprising, we're doing well, because we're well managed.
You touched on Super League earlier. How big a story was that at the time? I was only, I guess, 12, so I remember it was a thing. I remember watching 2 grand finals, and obviously it's where we got to. Do you cover a lot of it in your writing, or have you? Or was it more from an outsider's point of view at that time?
Well, I started writing in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And so I'd had a couple of books published when Super League happened. When Super League happened, publishing stopped for 3 or 4 years, because people didn't know what's going to happen. Yeah. And everyone was covering the Super League war. So, the grand final books that I was writing and a few other biographies that I was writing just all of a sudden stopped. I didn't get anything published in 5 years. Because...
Was there a fear of taking sides? Or was it,
also, the game was in a state of flux. You didn't know where everything was going to go. Look, it was a crap fight. It was badly done, badly managed. The league didn't see it coming. The league were warned that it was going to happen, and they still didn't. They just thought, oh, no, we've got a license to print money here. We're just going to stay with the status quo. It was done for some of the right reasons, but it was done incredibly wrong.
Yeah.
Brisbane very selfishly, split the competition into the Murdoch press, took sides, and then Packer, who shored up the ARL, New South Wales Rugby League, jumped ship straight away on a business decision anyway, and started covering Super League games anyway. So it was really human nature at its worst, the media at its worst, and greed at its worst. I don't think anything good came out of it.
Yeah.
Really looking back on it.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of questions as someone who wasn't born the Super League war really started in 95. I was born 5 years later. Yep. But I've heard from many people from back then. Yeah. Well, this is just what I've heard from people, and I want to get your opinion on it. First things first, a lot of people who I see say in hindsight, everyone really probably should have gone towards the Super League's way, as today the game more mirrors what the Super League had envisioned for Rugby League. And another thing is that teams like the Western Reds, Adelaide Rams, etc., would still be around today if not for that war. So I guess for national expansion, it also had a negative impact. So what I want to ask is, do you agree that we would have been better off if everyone was just like, right, we'll all jump on this Super League train because the game is more like that today anyway? And do you believe, if not for a Super League war, we would still have teams such as the Western Reds, your Adelaide Rams, etc.?
No, I don't think so. The Super League exposed the holes in the game, because once you split into two and all your resources were split into two rival competitions, you saw where the gaps were.
Yeah.
And one thing that we learned about the Western Reds especially is that they were too isolated. Even though they gave us another time zone for a TV match, they're too isolated. And then Super League made every mistake in the book just through money, bad money. You know, Adelaide Rams. Why you would have a rugby league club in Adelaide who don't give a rat's about the game, I have no idea. You're never going to succeed. They probably said the same thing about Melbourne, but Melbourneites love sport, any sport.
Yeah.
And they look at the Grand Prix. They just adopted it.
There's also nothing else to do in Melbourne, so that helps.
Well, they've only got AFL, so you know that wears out after a couple of weeks. So they are sports-going people, so they do love it. Anyone who's spent a week in Adelaide, and I spent a lot of time in Adelaide over the years, there's nothing to do in Adelaide, and you know it's just far too isolated.
Yeah.
So what they did wrong with Super League. Murdoch won the Super League war. Super League won the Super League war. Murdoch won.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we're watching games on Fox
That's
these
right.
days. Yeah.
The fact that, and Packer stuffed us up, but the fact that the league couldn't see that Murdoch the Raider was coming with pay TV. Pay TV had been happening in America for 10, 15 years, you know, way back to the late 70s, early 80s. So the fact that they couldn't see past their own experience. The other thing is they were very antagonistic towards privately owned Brisbane, and Brisbane were shaking in the cage, and so they regretted the fact that they promoted Brisbane, and they wanted Brisbane to choke on the vine, and they didn't want to give Brisbane a heads up or anything, so they held their ground. What I believe what should have happened was that the two comps should have stayed in two conferences. They should have had a Sydney conference, which could have been run by the New South Wales Rugby League, and an outer Sydney conference that could have been run by Murdoch. That way Murdoch would have had to pick up all the travel costs. And at the end, you have a Super Bowl with the two leagues coming in.
Yeah.
The only thing with that problem is, as we've seen over the years, is that Murdoch, who has a bottomless pit of money, and the New South Wales League doesn't, is that they would have probably got a lot of the players away from the New South Wales Rugby League.
Yeah.
But the New South Wales Rugby League had two things that Murdoch didn't have. They had State of Origin. They owned State of Origin.
Yeah.
You probably haven't seen it, but Super League tried its own
Tri-series.
Yeah, I
Tri-series.
remember watching it. New Zealand involved. Yeah.
And it was rubbish.
Yeah.
You know, even though it was a good game, one game went for 108 minutes or something.
New Zealand to New South Wales, I think, was one.
Yeah, because they had Golden Point,
Yeah.
indefinite Golden Point. Yeah,
Yeah.
very exciting. So the New South Wales Rugby League had that ace in the hole, and then the New South Wales Rugby League also ran the ARL. They had international football.
Yeah.
So they could have held out. And what they should have done, even though Penrith went Super League, Canterbury went Super League, they could have brought them back and say, look, you're part of Penrith.
Yeah.
Or if they wanted to stay with Super League, they could have had cross conferences and had some Super League teams down here in Penrith. I think it would have been a much better competition, whereas now we're looking at expansion and we still have that inequality of too many Sydney-based teams and a lot of isolated out of Sydney teams.
Yeah.
So what did we learn? We learned that throwing a bunch of money, $100 million, $500 million at a problem doesn't fix the problem, and that the league didn't know what a good thing it had, and they capitulated because they bled money trying to keep pace with Super League, and they were effectively broke when the NRL put the game back together.
Yeah.
And they gave away all their bargaining tools. They just gave it away. And it was such a shame. But, you know, looking back on it now, you know, would Super League have happened anyway? Yes. The New South Wales really shot themselves in the foot. You don't promote 4 teams in one season.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, Sydney-based teams got jittery, especially Penrith. That's why Penrith went to Super League. That through natural attrition, Sydney teams would go broke. Cronulla would go broke. Penrith, who had a big financial problem at the time, they would go broke, and they would just, you know, go the way of Newtown and Glebe and Annandale and the old teams.
Yeah.
And the league were happy with that. And Arthurson stupidly came out with that statement. Oh, well, those teams will just go through natural attrition, so everyone got jittery.
Yeah.
You know, Penrith, what are we going to do? Well,
Wasn't there talks they were going to merge with Parramatta for a bit?
there were mergers all over the place. Mergers being offered. You know, we used to joke on the hill, oh, we're going to be the West Panthers.
Yeah.
You know, the Penrith Eels. Oh God. You know, fate worse than death. All that was in that state of flux during the Super League wars. I don't think Penrith needed to go, but Roy Simmons explained it to me, and he was the coach at the time when they went. He said, they said we were safe. Geographically, we should have been safe.
Yeah.
Got the biggest junior league in the world.
Yeah.
We've got to be safe. But
We're also just far enough out of Sydney,
Yeah.
aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah, but look what they did to South Sydney Foundation Club. Won the
right.
most premierships. They were the first to go.
Yeah.
So Penrith had to shore up their position, and it was done for the right reasons, but the wrong way. And that pretty much sums up Super League anyway. But here we are. You know, we've got a viable pay TV system. We've got it free to air for people who don't want to do pay. We've got a pretty good competition that now we're realising is inequitable because the salary cap is not equitable. It's an exciting time for rugby league. It's an exciting time. The game is good, although it's not the game that I watched in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different game. It's an athletic game.
Want to get your opinion on that, and if the game actually is a better product today and more popular today than it was back then.
Well, I suppose the best way to have people turning off your podcast is for me, as an old bloke, to say it was much better in my day and blah, blah, blah.
No, lots of people agree with you, though, so that's a thing. So.
It was a different game. As I said before, it was a more man-on-man game, but it's also a lot more violent. There's a lot more back play, off-the-ball play, a lot more violence. And I don't miss that at all, you know. So the game today is very exciting. Very exciting. You know what wingers can do today. Wingers before, you know.
Well, even the I guess the Bob Fulton rule with just the corner posts, he got rid of that being a touchline, and look at what that's done for the modern game now.
Absolutely, and you know, even the fact that wingers, you know, bring so much excitement to the game. And players are obviously a lot more athletic as well. You know, they're fitter. They're also rock harder, which is why we're getting a lot of concussions.
Yeah.
You know, it's like running into a brick wall physically. But just like any sport, including especially rugby union, there comes a tipping point where if you change the game's fabric too much, and we're almost there. I can see it with Volandi's 6 again rule as well. You know, we changed it last year. It worked. Fantastic. We've changed it twice more now.
Yeah.
I don't think it is working.
And both those changes, there was no reason for it. It just
No.
was change for the sake of change, which...
Well, obviously somebody got into his ear, and he's got to be careful of this. He's a very astute practitioner, but, you know, if I bowled him up at a party and I said, I want scrums to come back, would scrums come back? You know, there's got to be a reason for it. There was no reason to change it, I agree. And I think the game is getting very close to, you know, 13 backs playing with 13 backs.
Yes. Well, I threw out a theory that we might see eventually body shape changes where people will be training to lose 10 kilos rather than have your big boys and be... You don't get touch footy stage, but you're going to be 90 kilo sort of bodies more than 110 kilo bodies.
Bob Fulton said to me, I interviewed him a couple of years ago, he said in his day wingers were 80 kilos wringing wet, and the forwards were 110, and now your wingers are 120, and, as heavy as your forward. So it's a different game. I thoroughly enjoy watching rugby league, but I look at, during grand final week, Fox has the old games on.
Yeah.
So you might see a 1991 grand final with Penrith. Count the tackles. Count how many tackles are made during the game. I think there were some stats out that, there's now 100 more tackles in a modern match than there was, say, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So we don't want it to get to the point where it's becoming, unfixable.
Yeah.
You don't want it to get to a point where it's not sustainable. And players are saying now the game is so fast we can barely keep pace, and we're at that tipping point where it's going to become impossible to defend.
Yeah.
And, okay, well, we want that. We want more tries. No, we don't. We don't want...
No.
Do you remember there was a Super League... It wasn't Super League season. It was an early NRL season. And teams were winning 48 to 36, and, it was ridiculous. I think it was the interchange or something. But, I don't want to see too much tinkering.
And because now, especially this game, I think 2017-18, it got very much too robotic. It was very much completion rate set, and it just games became a bit too monotonous. Now, when what you're saying, like 18 points isn't a lead anymore. If you have all the ball, you can swing around 18 points in 15 minutes. Or if another team, if you go, even yesterday in the Tigers game, they only go 14-0, 14-6 half time, you'll take that, because if you play well enough, you chase it down.
You're absolutely right. Leads are very hard to defend now.
Yeah.
Are there close matches, or do teams get momentum and the score's 14-0 and then half time at 16-14?
Yeah.
Is that the sort of game?
And there's games where, even this year, where it's been 32-12, and you go, hang on, that was if you watch the game, it was a close game. But it just you get there and it's all of a sudden they've won by 20.
Well, by the end of the game yesterday, I think it was 36-20 to the Eels, which suggests a bit more of a dominant performance than it was.
It should have been. It was 22-20 when
with like 3 minutes to go. Yeah.
Look, I hated last year's grand final as a match. I hated it because we lost. But the fact that Penrith were down 22-0.
Yeah.
And then 22-0 at half time.
Yeah, 22-0.
26-0. It was just rubbish. We played rubbish. We deserved it. We made mistakes. The referees put their bib in. And then all of a sudden we're back to 26-20.
Yeah.
And we almost won it in the last 8 seconds or something.
Yeah.
That's rubbish rugby league.
Yeah.
I didn't want to win it that way. And if you look at the game in two halves, no way Melbourne should have been able to lose that game.
No way.
Yeah.
They should not have been 22-0, maybe 12-0.
As a Penrith supporter, you can say Melbourne were the better team.
Oh, yeah. Well, they handled it better. We handled it, Cleary throws an intercept. We had Crichton run an illegal line and try to get called back. May thought he was defending, but he lashed out with his foot, and his foot hit the ball. That's a no-no. So a lot of things just went against us. But I don't like the fact that games run with momentum. The only good thing about what Volandis has done is taken the referee. He hasn't taken the bunker out of the equation, but he's taken the referee out of the equation. When we had two referees, you had two people just ruining the game.
Yes.
Penalty after penalty.
Or worse, had different interpretation in the same game. So you'd be one team
ridiculous.
Offside with 10-metre lines, the other with 6.
And why are we so special that we need two referees? We did need two referees. That's what the linesmen there. They keep the 10 yards.
Yeah.
They still get it wrong. They still make mistakes. But I don't like the rule at the moment of the bunker overruling the try. But they don't want any howlers. So if you've got 2 minutes until the kicker gets back to his mark to kick the conversion, and you see a little bobble or a knock-on or whatever. But as Phil Gould said the other night, the bunker is actively looking for reasons to take tries off. That's not what the game's about. Imagine a grand final that someone scores a try.
Yeah.
But see, what they've done now is that the league and the referees are saying, okay, we're going upstairs to look at it. Everyone hold their horses. They're going, oh, looked like a try, bang.
Yeah.
And they're still overturning it. That's annoying people.
Yeah.
So I want that out of the game.
It's a funny thing because it felt even this weekend. There's probably 3 occasions where I thought something happened and they didn't check it. It felt like they didn't check it, and they lined up and kicked it. And everyone, it's half the teams are waiting for almost to be overturned, and it was awarded, and off they went. But then you don't want to get to but then you get to the point where they do go upstairs, and it's almost like the stewards throwing in a protest. Yeah, well, if you're going, why are we going when you've already obviously made your decision? Like, just turn around and say no.
What about that farcical nines competition up at Bathurst or wherever, where Penrith were beaten by St George?
Cody Ramsey.
Yeah.
In the second row. Yeah.
Now, sorry,
I get that. I'm fine with that. Like, overruling that, I'm saying overall. That's fine.
No, I'm not. I'm not fine with it. That was a laughing. That's why there's no nines this year.
I'm saying checking that's fine.
Yeah.
But kids are
Yeah. So what the league are doing, they're overcompensating for that because they were made to look like a laughing stock.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't overturn it. Oh, if I was the captain of St George, I would have gone up to Penrith to say, we forfeit. You guys go through. It was a Mickey Mouse decision. So what we don't want is the game being ruined by Mickey Mouse decisions, but we don't want the game being ruined by late overturning for technical breaches or whatever. If they ever bring in a 10-metre camera that can measure offside, we're in a lot of trouble because there's no point having referees. It'll all be decided upstairs.
That's right. It feels that PVL's done a great thing with obviously getting back on the field in COVID and the stuff he does, and a lot of the great stuff he does with racing. I don't agree with all of that. As a punter, I think some of the race field stuff and that in years gone by I didn't agree with, but that's a different chat. But it feels like he does roll out a lot of lip service stuff. Like this HIA rule is just lip service to me.
Yeah.
You go, okay, we had a game where 3 blokes got knocked out. We'll just put a rule out now if you have 3 blokes. It's probably never going to happen again.
They've also announced today there's more changes that they've made to it.
Yeah,
it's now if it's a...
I haven't fully read today, so I'll be honest about
so if a player gets injured in any way and they won't come back
and foul
at
play.
all. Foul play. So you talk about rules being tinkered with. Well, that rule's been around for a week and they're already...
But that's, to me, was just a knee-jerk. It actually doesn't mean anything. The one time it'll happen in the next 5 years, they'll say, hey, we did this, but it's just them saying, hey, we've got it covered. It's almost like not covering their own ass, but maybe covering their own ass. It's just
what
lip
happened
service to
before
me.
was that people used to get annoyed, especially the media used to get annoyed with the board making decisions and taking a long time to make. Who were the 10 numbskulls who came up with this decision? So Volandis, who is very good at, I suppose, reading the mood of the room.
Yes.
He's taking it upon it himself to say, look, people don't like it, I'm going to change it, And people go, oh, fantastic, it's a decision. Now, he got away with it the first couple of times with the referees.
Yeah.
No consultation. No, go back to one referee. But he's got to be very careful that he doesn't make knee-jerk decisions and policy on the run.
Yeah.
Because people won't wear that.
Yeah.
And a couple of the rules that he's made this year, or someone's made, the concussion rule, the 18th man rule, have just sounded a bit wishy-washy.
Yes.
So he's got to be very careful that he doesn't throw away his hard-earned credibility on Mickey Mouse decisions that don't need to be made.
There's just been a couple of weeks where it feels like he sat and watched 360 and gone, well, I better fix it. And that's it. It's NRL 360.
You're right, Paul Kent.
Yeah, but it's, I don't know.
God forbid.
Your own work. Let's bring it back to you a little bit. We talked about you starting out last time, I guess, from school teaching towards writing. Just give a quick proxy of your footsteps into authorship and the books you've ghosted, the books you've written, the books you've enjoyed the most, I guess.
Well,
That's a lot of questions. Sorry.
No. Look, what happened was, even when I was in high school and when I was in college, I wanted to write. I wanted to. But what do you write about? The hardest thing was finding something to write about, and because I had read so much about rugby league, I had watched so much about rugby league, and I'm by no means a rugby league expert, and I don't like the term rugby league historian. Anyone with a library card is an historian.
Yeah.
At least I knew, and I could put into words what I felt about certain issues. And one of the things, I read, or I might have seen it in the movie, I don't know, if you want to start writing, write what you know. Don't start writing about stuff you don't know.
Yeah.
Because it'll be poked at. So, and the great thing about rugby league writing was that there is a specific format. Ollie, you'd know this as being a student of journalism.
Daggy also writes
Yeah.
for racing. We've got to give that a shout out too.
Yeah. So
Progress Racing, I'll give them a plug.
yeah. So when you write about, newspapers, in the old days of newspapers, there is a journalistic style of writing. And with rugby league, you have a vernacular, you have a format, and how do you say stuff original, and how do you still keep it within a format that people can read?
Yeah.
So I found the discipline of that very, very good. So I started writing little statistical things, and I got those published, and then I started writing match reports, and I sort of got those republished, and then I was teaching at the time, and I decided, look, I really want to have a go at this writing a book about rugby league, and in those days in the 80s there were no books on rugby league. You couldn't find a history book. Probably the one the best history book ever written about rugby league was published in 1988. That was Gary Lester's History of Australian Rugby League.
I think I've got that.
Yeah, nice.
Big one.
I know guys who waited in line, at 7 o'clock in the morning to get that book. So I was very lucky to get published when rugby league literature was in its infancy.
So you sort of saw that gap in the market and you thought, right, there's not too much going on here. Maybe I can jump in and make a bit of a name for myself.
Well, being a nobody who had nothing published, yes, I could jump in. And it was nothing...
Sorry to cut in. Were sporting biographies and autobiographies a big thing in the 80s? Because I know growing up as a sporting teenager, you get one for Christmas every year, you get whatever it might be. And
in
it's sort
cricket
of,
it was.
but it doesn't feel like, before that, there's not great books sitting around about... anyone before the 80s, really.
Steve Mortimer brought out a book called Top Dog, his biography. That was about 84. Sterlo Jumped the Gun.
Yeah.
That might have been 80, 85.
Oh, very early.
84, 85.
Yeah.
And the third one was Mal Meninga. Mal Meninga had two biographies. Yeah, in the 80s. And I had spent a couple of months writing a history of the grand final. And I was working for a publisher. I was teaching, but I was also working for a publisher. And computers were just coming in.
Yeah.
So the first edition, the first draft, I had handwritten, first draft. Second draft, typed, an old typewriter I had. The third edition was on computer, so much easier to edit.
Yeah.
And once I'd put it on computer, I was able to get it published. And the publisher just asked me, what else do you want to do? Yeah, could you do a biography? And I went, yeah, I think so. Who would you like to do it one? And there were only really two players in 1990, 91 that I thought were standouts. And one was Des Hasler, because Des was a Penrith boy. Roy Simmons was the other one. Yeah, Roy Simmons. Royce was a neighbour of mine, and I would have loved to have done his book then. But he was playing reserve grade, I think, at the time. So he was coming to the end of his career. Probably would have been, if I had any vision, grabbing Royce would have been best. Yeah. But in the end, I just pulled out a name. I said, Terry Lamb. And they said, Terry Lamb, So I just rang him up. He was in the phone book. And I had no manager. He had no manager. And I just said, look, publisher has expressed interest about doing your biography. And this is a guy who never finished school, never finished high school. Yeah. And he said, come around and have a beer and we'll talk about it. And I was about 27. 27, 28. And we had a beer and he goes, okay, let's take a punt. That's how easy it was. Yeah. Whereas now, and this happened to me chasing Jonathan Thurston's biography, 4 years of negotiation with managers, publishers, the media, Thurston's family, Thurston's wife, not Thurston himself, all these other people, and ended up going to another person, which is fine.
Yeah.
So it was much easier in those days, it was much more innocent. So just happened to be in the right place at the right time. When Rugby League Publications was just taking off, that whole literature form, I was getting published. And I had enough knowledge of the game and enough ability, we're not talking Tolstoy here, we're talking Rugby League, to write 50,000 words about certain things, still a lot of words, to get published. So I was just very lucky.
Yeah.
But I worked at it, I gave up my teaching career for a year. I sacrificed a lot. I gave up a good career, I worked for a publisher who didn't pay his bills, didn't pay me for 6 months. I had a wife and a family and a mortgage and everything. And then I went back to school, got a job, got a promotion, kept on writing on weekends, and persevered with another 3 years before I got published. So certainly wasn't any overnight success, or it's not a case of I think I'll get up and write a book.
Yeah.
It took years, whereas now it's streamlined down to a good 6 months. 3 to 6 months to get a book published, and then another 3 months for it to come out. But it was exciting times, very naive times. Didn't make a lot of money out of it, but I got published.
Yep.
And once you get published, it's like a calling card. I've done this book. Do you want to do one? And then I was able to do other books. And I ended up doing Royce's, wasn't his biography, but it was his reminiscences of growing up in the country, which was a lot of fun. Did Matty Rogers's, Luke Lewis, Cliffy Lyons, and enjoyed it.
Could you see? I was going to say, if you were, say, Ollie's age in this sort of day and age, you'd be setting out on the same path as him, just doing a Facebook page and trying to get it just starting that way.
Different world now.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, probably about 2 months ago now, I had the pleasure of interviewing Tony Adams, otherwise known as The Mole, and I asked him, as an aspiring journalist myself, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone coming through the ranks who does want to be maybe a Tony Adams one day? And he sort of echoed your sentiment. He said the biggest thing is to get published somehow, some way. You just got to get published, which thankfully I have been through my work with everything
Online,
Rugby League. Yeah. Look, I just wanted to, I guess, give my thoughts on what it takes to, I guess, write about Rugby League, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, because I get 13-year-old kids, for example, starting up Rugby League pages, messaging me saying, why, I write a lot of stuff, why isn't it getting published, why aren't I as popular? And I guess it's sort of why have you been able to get this job and, have a relatively successful page and I haven't? And the thing I've always taken is I don't necessarily know any more about Rugby League than your average bloke down the pub. I'm not trying to sound egotistical here, but the big thing is that education level and just in general those writing skills and, that ability to articulate a piece of work. A 13-year-old's obviously not finished their education. They don't know as much as they need to, so their work's obviously not going to come out as good. What I want to ask you is, I guess the biggest part about being an author, being a writer in Rugby League is not knowing about Rugby League. It's that knowledge of writing. Is that the big thing? Because to me it is, that knowledge of writing, how to put a piece of work together.
Look, I think what makes a good writer is a good reader. I think you've got to read. Like, I read everything. I would read 5 books, on the go a week.
Yeah.
No problems. Biographies, histories, and you might read a whole book and you might just see one little phrase or one word or go, oh wow, or you can say, well, see how he's written that. Gee, that's
salient. That's Daggy's favourite word.
No, he's the last week.
Salient.
Salient.
Every week I seem to come up with a word that the Rugby League podcast would. I don't listen. Well, to put it in perspective, I don't listen. Obviously, there's 400,000 Rugby League podcasts, and I can't listen to the ones that, we're back here to talk about it. I just don't listen to it. I just don't want to listen to it.
No.
Whereas at least if I can present something I would want to listen to,
yeah.
at least I've had 17 beers, and it probably sounds a bit slurry, but before that, but it's a level of education. To your point, it's the same thing to me.
Well,
because I wouldn't turn on the radio. I wouldn't turn the radio to listen to them, so I'm not going to go on a way to devote an hour or 3 hours in our case to listen to some other people talk about it when I.
Well, this is why I jumped on with you guys so early when you guys started the pod. We're going off in our own thing now, but it's because within 5 minutes, and I noticed with podcasts too, within a 5-minute period, you can instantly tell when someone knows what they're talking about and someone has some actual knowledge and has taken the time to research and sort of articulates themselves in a certain way. Because, there are so many podcasts and pages out there of people who just think, well, I'm a rugby league fan, I watch a bit of footy, I can do this and be successful. But,
They've done a little bit of research on this. They say to be an expert in any field, you must spend 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. Now, it's 50 weeks in a year. How many hours a week, to get over many years? And I think, well, looking back, okay, well, how did I start writing about rugby league? Well, I watched a lot of rugby league. I read a lot of, read Rugby League Week every week.
Yeah.
I read any books that came out. I read the paper every day. I was a huge devourer of the newspaper as a kid. I used to read it from cover to cover.
Yeah.
My secret job was I wanted to be a journalist. And I read everything, anything that was written about rugby league, you just zero in on. So by the time you get to about 18 and you want, and if kids are trying to publish websites and web pages, then all power to them, but they're going to lack the finesse and whatever, unless they're a prodigy. But the important thing is that, when you're ready to start writing, it'll come naturally. Like when you force something, it's forced. And the other thing about rugby league is that it's a working man's game. You can't be pretentious about it. There are plenty of authors who have written books, and I won't name them, you can read them, who try and intellectualise rugby league, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You're talking about a physical, man-on-man game of strategy, cunning, and sometimes brute force. You're not talking about Zen Buddhism. You're not talking about something ethereal that you can't pluck out of the
I don't
air.
think, and especially you can't put it on this level and the blokes actually doing it aren't on that level. They just stand out there and they know to keep their shape and do what they do.
And what you can do as a writer, people who want to write, how do I say something original? Well, you can draw analogies, similes. You can bring in pop culture references. That annoys the daylights out of me. And a guy that you mentioned, Paul Kent, who I don't want to say he's a better writer than I am, but he writes for a living. So do I. But he writes for a living in a daily rag. You can't be so pop cultural-ish that, it's meaningless what you're writing about. And, sometimes somebody will pull out a word or pull out a simile or an analogy or whatever, and you just wince and go, oh my God, what are they trying to do? I'm a big believer especially in writing and in journalism, I'm a big believer in economy of words. Don't use 20 words when you can use 5. And
I think where it's hard is, say, Oli writing, for example, he has to hit 2,000 words to get paid. So 8 cents a word wherever he gets paid. So he knows he has to hit 2,000 or 1,000 words. So you almost get to the stage you're like, okay, I've got to find 500 words here. What am I going to do? And that's where, I think, and that then bleeds into the rest of their work. Sorry to cut
well,
you
you
off.
will look. You can write filler if you want, but you're going to get caught out.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
So how do you make, and also without putting yourself in the story, which is another no-no that I hate.
So referring to I believe, etc. Yeah.
Or I was talking to so-and-so and he said this and blah, blah, blah. Dislike journalists who do that. Even as a writer who's written books, I've got very strong editors that say, do not put yourself in the story. Maybe in the introduction you might say how you came to the story.
Does that become harder in the true crime stuff?
For sure.
Because it's your opinion, essentially. So
it's my opinion, but I'm not part of the story. I'm looking at the whole story.
You can't through your eyes. This is where I looked at. This is how I looked at. Yeah.
But the thing is that to write with authority, you've got to know your subject, and you've got to con yourself that I can do this. That there's an audience for this. Anyone who spends a weekend in their bedroom writing an essay, or a story, or an article, the only thing that could keep you going or keep you from, hitting the pub or hitting the TV or hitting the Game Boy is the fact that somebody's going to read this. Somebody is interested in this.
Yeah.
And that's what drives, it's ego. It drives all writers. I want people to read this. I'm going to say something fresh, original, and insightful in what I'm talking about. Now, I try and do that with Rugby League. You try and, draw links. You try and talk about the ribbon of history. You try and talk about what we learned about this, or what this success or failure means. So as long as you can talk about feelings and you can sort of dive down a little bit, and every now and then say things originally, you'll always have an audience. And it's not because you're a better writer than anyone else, but it is. It's a real craft. It's an art. Putting the words in a certain order so that they make a certain sense and give a certain ambience to a story is good fun.
Yeah.
And good writers do it deliberately.
Yeah.
I'm going to plant a little seed here. I'm going to write this sentence, and I'm going to put it in there and see if anyone bites.
Yeah.
That's the great thing, great fun about writing, I find.
Yeah. Well, just even from my point of view, one of the articles I was most happy with was about the Melbourne Cup, and it just came from a Dean Lester quote about Jai McNeil's ride, where in last year's Melbourne Cup, where he led the whole way, and he just went, I didn't back it either, but basically Dean Lester was almost in tears saying, I told him to be brave, and he was braver than I could ever be, and just that, the way he said it and the way that, I essentially based the whole article around that quote because it was just such a tremendous quote to me in the moment, and that held up. And I think
you want people to see it.
Yeah, and I just thought, look, if you're not one of the people listening on RSN Melbourne's second digital channel, you'd never heard it. Yeah. But it just happened I was, and I thought I'll use that. But yeah.
Good writing is personal, but it's not personal to the writer. It can be, and it's not personal to the subject. It's personal to the audience.
Yeah.
So if you can tap into, like mate and I, when we started off writing, we'd be writing stuff, and Greg Anderson and I wrote a book on North Sydney, of all people. And we used to joke, when they read this, I'll be crying,
Yeah.
So you're deliberately tugging at people's heartstrings, without being soppy about it.
Yes.
But that's what you got to do. But, getting back to Ollie's point about starting out, there are so much more opportunities, and yet there are less opportunities for getting published now.
Well, it's like the traditional journalism age. A lot of people say that journalism is a dying profession. It's not necessarily a dying profession. It's a changing profession. Newspapers aren't going to be around for that much longer. It's all going to be online. And there are so many opportunities to get published online. Like, I know so many websites where they will accept just your average person submitting an article, and they may upload it. It's that easy today. So there are many opportunities, I guess, just not in the traditional sense.
The issue is that anyone can do a web page, anyone can do a blog, anyone can do whatever. And in my days, a lot of people could get published. But after getting published a couple of times, you raise the bar a little bit and say, well,
you got to change it up.
How can I write something of quality that will last?
Yep.
And that's what bloggers and web page designers, have to say, well, okay, I'm published now, but how do I get up to that next level?
Yeah, well, I've seen in terms of I know it's not the exact same, but in terms of rugby league pages, and lots of kids like to start them up these days, and they come and go, and there's just the one thing: you need to be committed to it. You need to be all in. The one you speak about originality. The one thing that I say to people who ask me how do I start out a page is an original name, an original logo. There are so many pages I personally see who have the NRL logo as their logo, and a name such as NRL.news or something. Like, you got to find something that stands out. I was lucky enough. It was a segment of a football soccer YouTuber that I watched, and it was called In My Opinion. That's not his page, or that was his. This particular segment, this series he was doing, I was like, okay, Rugby League in My Opinion, and I was lucky enough to get that. And now I have seen a few pages floating around. It's called Rugby League Opinion or something like that. And I see plenty of pages called Rugby League something column or something roast and that, because of pages like Clarkie's column and the NRL roast. But those pages won't get the time of day because they're so such a comparison can be easily made with those bigger pages. It's like, well, you're just trying to be like them. You have to find a way to be original whilst not being original, because you are in that rugby league industry and trying to break into that, but you have to be your own entity, I guess. You
They're generic, yeah.
How does the process, just quickly back to, so example, going and having a beer with Terry Lamb, the next step is then, do you then spend 2 hours a week with him for 3 months? Do you,
Well, when you're
is it
working
all
with
over the phone?
when you're working with another person, or in the old days when I first started, I like to be with the person,
Yeah.
because you can see their look on their face, whether they're pissed off or not, or cranky, tired, whatever, laughing, over the phone. I have done a few interviews over the phone, but they're just through necessity, and I just had a recorder and just voice recorder in the old days. The old days I used to have mini cassette tapes, those, and then you'd go home and you'd spend hours transcribing them verbatim, and then you'd have to, like a jigsaw puzzle, cut it all up into bits and take the best bits out. And, the worst part would be if somebody went off on a tangent and you had to transcribe it all up, and there's 5,000 words I'll never use.
Yeah.
So you learn as you went to edit. Oh, he's talking crap here. I'm just going to, shorten this to here. There's nothing, So, but there was no getting away with just a hard slog. The big decisions you had to make was, do I write it in his voice or my voice? And it's usually about the quality of the interviewer. Now, Terry Lamb was a lovely guy, but he's actually very shy, and he'd agree, even though he's a millionaire now, he wasn't highly educated.
Yeah.
So writing in his own voice, I would have been putting a lot of words in his mouth.
Yeah.
Even to structure a sentence.
Yeah.
So I thought, no, I'm just getting enough of some good quotes here. So I wrote it in my voice and put his quotes in. Same with Cliff Lyons. Ian Heads pulled me aside one day at a function and said, good luck getting 50,000 words out of Cliff Lyons, because, it's yep, no.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely correct. So I wrote that in my voice. But other people who talked, like Matty Rogers loved to talk, Roy Simmons. Roy Simmons was great because not only did he love to talk, he had a very particular way of talking, like a real country style of talking. And so one of the things you're able to develop with your ear and your writing style is how to keep the quirkiness of their syntax.
So you bleed it in, and I guess it comes for the reader that shines through.
Yeah. So I wrote it in his voice. Said there's going to be in the first person. So I. So you're going to be. There's a responsibility as a writer not to put words in his mouth that he doesn't understand, that he would never say, and he would never utter, or stuff that you wanted to put in there. They were the two big decisions. And then when you're going to a history book like the story of the grand finals or whatever, then you could write in your own authoritative voice and bring in quotes. And I would ring up guys over the phone. I rang up a lot of old guys. I rang up Norm Proven. I rang Arthur Summons. I rang Johnny Sattler. Found them in the phone book. Just rang them up.
Yeah.
And I had no voice recorder that could attach to the phone, so I'm writing verbatim quickly as I can. Then when you got clever and you had the right, I had a 2-phone system, and I had one on speakerphone, and I'd have the recorder.
Yeah.
And it took me years to get an interview with Bob Fulton.
Yeah.
And the recorder didn't work. So I only got about a third of the quotes that he gave me, and from my handwritten notes.
Yeah.
So that was really disappointing. But they're all the things that happened in the old days when you're writing.
Yeah.
But you did it because you loved it. You did it because, you hoped that there was a market for it. Somebody was going to read it, and it was good fun. It was still a very new industry.
Yeah.
I'm writing rugby league books.
Yeah, so essentially, I guess you're blazing your own trail there, really, at the time.
Yeah, and there were Ian Heads was getting published, Mike Coleman, Gary Lester. So you're in pretty good company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And me.
Yeah.
And a couple of other guys. A couple of those books you look back on the time and you go, okay, what did they write after this? So some of them were one-hit wonders. Some of them had long careers. So for me, it was always about momentum. You know, what was going to be the next book.
Yeah.
So you can always use that as a parlay into another book, into another title.
Well, you've given us the best part of an hour and a half. A couple more things I want to touch on.
Sure.
Ollie, anything else?
I just wanted to maybe bring up
For argument?
what you're doing today. Semi-retired, but you are working with the likes of Anthony Loxley, someone who we're good friends with. We interviewed before at the same event where we interviewed you, the book launch of League on Sunday, Work on Monday. I believe you're working on another book with Lox. Is that what you're looking to do now for the foreseeable future, helping out authors coming through, or is there going to come a time where, Nick's...
Well, look, I've known Tony for a number of years. I published him when I was a publisher working in Sydney. And he is one of the few people who is taking a punt on big, colour, heavy rugby league books, which I love. And I love doing the photo research, and I love talking about an era that I grew up in. And, you know,
And I gave that, actually, the Work on Sunday book I gave to my old man for Christmas. He loved it.
Yeah, because it's our demographic.
Yeah.
You know, and Tony has a number of projects that he wants to do, and I will pick and choose which ones I come on board and say, look, I can add something to that, or, no, mate, that's out of my comfort range, whatever. But I'm still working for other publishers. So I've just finished a book on horse racing immortals, Farlap, Winks, you know, the top 20.
With yourself or through?
No, just through. No, I'm not publishing it myself.
Written yourself or with anyone else?
No, I've written it with myself. Okay. And part of the fun was doing the photo research, which I had a lot of enjoyment doing, and it's being published by a good publisher, and it'll be out in October in time for the Melbourne Cup.
Cool.
And I think it'll be a really nice little book.
But again, that's apart from, I guess, your... I've just had a blank... bloke who wrote Bart's autobiography, he's dead now. It's not a big market anymore.
No. Well,
not a lot of authors anyway. I know Jessica always wrote a real good one about Peter Pan and about someone else.
Yeah, that's a pretty good book. The problem with horse racing is that publishers have always had a bias against publishing. Yeah. Because they say, well, you know, punters would rather have a punt than buy the book. Yeah. But there are horse lovers and history lovers who would love a good book on horse racing. Yeah. So I've been working for about 5 or 6 years on a book on the Melbourne Cup, every Melbourne Cup, all the stats. I've been collecting photos, and I really hope to bring that out in the next 5 years. But there are a number of projects I'm working on. There's that one, there's that. Not too much rugby league, mainly niche rugby league. Ian Collis, another guy that I've published with. Ian and I have a project that we're working on about rugby league in the 1970s. We'd like to bring out maybe retrospective yearbooks, you know, like what was 1985 like in rugby league. Yeah. And they're for the collector, you know, they're not for, you know, maybe young people like yourselves who love the history of the game.
Is that a matter of going and looking at, going into library archives? How would you go about?
Well, library archives and also Big League that was published that year. A lot of stuff's on video, YouTube.
I suppose you get in contact with a few of the old players.
Maybe. You know, and I think it'd be, as an older person looking back, I think it'd be a lot of fun to do that. And I think an increasing demographic, if not young guys like yourself, who are interested in history of the game, but guys like my generation who grew up through it, you know, to sit through a 400-page book that has everything in it about the 1970s, I think it'd be quite exciting. But it's a niche. You know, it's not Harry Potter. It's not going to sell millions. Yeah. But I'm semi-retired now, so I can pick my projects and say, well, I'm going to spend 3 months on that or 6 months on that, or I'm going to spend 4 years on this one. Yeah. And there's a couple of projects that I am doing that are long-term, say 3-4 year projects. And you know, I'm happy to do that at my age.
I want to ask about your love of racing. Every Saturday you're doing the form or having a bet. How did it all start off, and how much do you enjoy it?
No, I love horse racing. I love the history, just like rugby league. I love the history of it. I love the horse. I've had favourite horses over the years.
Who are a couple of your favourites from out there?
Probably Manicato is my favourite horse. Not because I won a lot of money on him, because he was always so short, but just his heart and, you know, the way that he used to lead all the way. So I started off horse racing very late. I was probably 17, 18 before I went into horse racing.
Yeah.
My grandfather used to listen to the races on a Saturday afternoon. Ollie's dad, Paddy Kellner, will remember Bill Keach, who ran the corner store in Penrith where we grew up. Paddy lived next door. I used to stay up there on a Saturday afternoon and watch wrestling and watch the football on TV. And then
Who was your favourite wrestler? I know Daggy's a bit of a sufferer.
Spiros Arion was my favourite.
Yeah. What about Nature Boy?
Probably after my time. I go right back to Killer Carl Cox days.
Yeah, so Vinny tells the stories about the old, when it used to be filmed in Melbourne. It used to be, for probably 5 years, it was the biggest promotion in Australia, in the world.
Yeah, there was an old Rugby League commentator who commentated on it, or
Michael
an
Cleary.
AFL
Mike Cleary, yeah. So I fell in love with horse racing, and I'd have $1 on something, which was a lot of money in those days, especially when you didn't have a job.
Yeah.
Melbourne Cup mainly. Rather than going to a sweep, I'd have a bet on a horse.
Yeah.
So I started punting on horses, which I still love doing. But you got to love the horse, and you got to, you got to study the form, study the horse. Can the horse win? What are his or her attributes? What does the jockey bring? What does the weight bring? All that sort of stuff. But it's a great industry. Great. There's probably too much racing at the moment. I've lost a little bit of passion for it. But the great horses, Farlap, Tulloch, Kingston Town, Manicato, Superimpose, those horses, I loved going back and telling their story.
Yeah.
What was the first race they won? Did they know it was going to be a champion? And writing about a horse, which is not a football player, what was the horse's champion qualities? Could the horse win like might and power from the front?
Yeah.
Could they come from behind? Did they have a withering burst? Did they work well for certain jockeys, certain conditions? Yeah, fascinating.
I think you always have that extra nostalgia for the early horses you get in your game. Same as me, I loved So You Think. That was when I started betting, and So You Think, More Joyous were sort of the two that I first fell in love with. And I think now, when you bet every Saturday, you struggle to fall in love with any of them anymore. But
because there's too many.
Yeah.
And
Happy Clapper, you did Pat Webster's.
Excuse me.
Is just your Happy Clappers and Haylists of the world. You sort of have a soft spot for, but and you were fortunate enough to write Pat Webster's story.
Yeah, Pat Webster, just a lovely guy. Look, I was working for the publisher, and it came up in research that a good sporting biography, racing biography, would be on the cards because you got the combination of trainer and horse. So we bandied around a few names and.
Oh, you just put your microphone up. Yeah,
Sorry,
that's all right.
we bandied a few names around, and Pat Webster was doing not only he had three bows in his arsenal. First of all, he was a former jockey. He was the trainer of Happy Clapper, but he was working with young jockeys and stable people who were battling drugs. So that three combination. So I went and talked to him about it, and I wasn't going to write it. I was going to get someone else to write it. And we had such a great time talking about horses because my knowledge of horses was great. Talked about all these old horses and that. And he said, "Okay, well, it's a done deal. We'll do the book." He goes, "You'll do it." And I said, "No, I'll find you a writer." He goes, "No, you'll do it." I went, "Well, I haven't got time to do it because I was a publisher at that time." And he goes, "Oh, well, if you can't do it, I'm not going to do it." And I said, "Look, just let's keep it on the boil for 6 months." So within 6 months, I finished my job as a publisher, and it was the first job that I did as a semi-retired writer.
Yeah.
Was to go back up and say, "Pat, I'd really like to do this book with you." So it came out. It was a lot of fun. It was a good story. I think racing people would love it. Does it cross over into other areas? Probably not enough. But you do your best, and I certainly enjoyed it. I still speak to Pat, every week, every second week. Thank you, mate. So no opportunity is a lost opportunity. If you get to work with other people.
And just lastly on the racing, you approached the form. Do you have anything you look out for, or you?
No, not really. Probably stupidly, I get favourite horses and I back them. Doesn't matter if they can't win.
Yeah.
I own a couple of horses and a couple of small shares in horses. We've got a horse racing tomorrow at Canterbury, which we gave to my dad for his 80th birthday.
Oh, nice. Who's that?
A horse called Savoury. He's a Savabeel horse.
Bjorn?
Bjorn Baker.
Yep.
He won 2 starts ago,
Yeah.
got bogged down on a heavy track last start. Will be hard to beat tomorrow, but it's just great fun. It's great fun to enhance your love of racing. I've got a very small share. My exposure is very, very small. My bills are very small. But we maximise our enjoyment, especially for Dad, who's 86, and gets a real kick out of seeing his horse go around.
That's unreal. Yeah, my old man's just I've had a couple of small shares with Australian thoroughbreds over the years, but they were just 3-odd fillies that never really went anywhere. And then
It's a lottery.
And Vince has got a couple with Greg Hickman. But fantastic sport. I do love it. I love the coverage of it when it's done properly. So applaud you for that. We'll wrap up quickly with the obligatory questions. Back to footy. Who's your favourite players? Best players you saw? And maybe best players to deal with. You can even throw that you've enjoyed the most working with, I suppose.
Well, the best player I ever saw, and you got, I did see Bob Fulton play, and I did see Graham Langlands play. I didn't see Reg Gasnier. Reg Gasnier retired in '67. I started watching in '68. They were all good players, but probably because I saw him play more than anyone else, Greg Alexander is my favourite player. And when you think of his speed, his goal kicking, his ability to score a try, back up, over the field, chip kick, recoveries kick for other people, just watch him in the grand final, in 91, how he has that whole second half on a string, just runs the whole game. I don't care if I'm biased, but I would say he's the best player I've seen.
Yep.
Have you dealt with Brandy much in terms of maybe getting quotes and stuff?
No, I've met him twice. We had a mutual friend, and I met him at a birthday party. Had a very quick chat with him. He was very generous, and said he knew of a couple of my books. But I've never had to interview him or ask his quotes on anything. So I haven't.
Nothing work related.
I've had nothing to bother. And then I met him one day at Fox Sports. Had a quick hello to him. Look. Because I'm older than Brandy, and I was in my 20s when he was 19. You don't look up to those players, and nor do you fanboy them.
Yeah.
But you sort of, one of the things, like even some of the famous people that I've met in other industries, you treat them as normal people.
You ever been starstruck?
No, not really.
I know you've done Barnes. You've chatted to Barnesy.
Barnesy.
Have you ever come? What's the closest, I guess, you've come to being starstruck then?
Probably Sir Tim Rice, who wrote Evita and Phantom of the Opera, and worked with Elton John, won an Oscar. I had lunch with him once in Sydney, and he was just charming Englishman, and I got his email through a contact. It was almost, we were drunk in a pub in England one night, and I said to her, she was an agent, I said, who do you know? Drop me a name.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm very good friends with Sir Tim Rice. I said, I'd love to talk to Sir Tim. I'd love to have lunch with him. So, give me his email. She goes, no, I can't do that. It's I said, no. So by the end of the night, after about 100 drinks, she gave me an email, but she said, if you do a book with him, you've got to cut me in. I said, that's fine, I'll do that. Yep. So I just dropped him an email saying, I'm a big fan. If you're ever in Australia, let's have lunch. Anyway, and because he's a cricket nut, 3 months later, he rang my office. Oh, is Alan Whittaker there? I'd like to. We'd let him know that Sir Tim Rice, I'd love to go out for lunch.
Where'd you take him?
I took him to Woolloomooloo Wharf, where John Laws eats, and we had at John Laws's table. I asked for John Laws's table, and we sat there. We had a great afternoon, and so I was a bit fanboy that day. But very generously, he said, "Look, I don't know too many people in Australia. My partner, he didn't have a wife at the time. He said my partner and I are hosting a New Year's Eve party. Would you and your wife like to come?"
Wow.
So we went along. There's nobody really famous there. Mark Nichols, the English cricket guy, he was there, and a few other people were there. But it was just pleasant. My wife was a huge fan. And then when we were in England, about 6 months later, he invited us to morning tea.
Wow.
So probably through his generosity, I was a fanboy.
Yeah.
We never did publish anything, and we exchanged emails over the years, but we've sort of dropped off each other. But you have to realise when you're dealing with famous people, they're famous, you're not.
Yeah.
So at what line are you bothering them?
That's right.
And what can you offer there's a disparity between fame. So
Yeah.
I have no fame, so can I have a relationship? I have this philosophy after meeting a lot of famous people through my career, is that, yes, you can be pleasant and you can work on a project, but there's no rule of quality because you don't have any exchange of fame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fame tends to either multiply or...
Yeah, and that's why,
not
Matt
use,
Damon's best friends with Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
Because, their parody is fantastic.
Yes, yeah.
Can I be friends with Chris Hemsworth? No.
Yeah.
Because I don't have anything in common with him.
That's right.
I'm not in that industry.
Yeah.
Do I want to be? No.
Yeah.
And probably all the guys, a couple of guys I palled around with for 3 or 4 months while we were doing their books. One was Glenn Shorrock from Little River Band, who is just the loveliest guy,
Yeah.
But you're not lifelong buddies.
Yeah.
You're friends during that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And being older, you know that. I suppose if I was a young, starry-eyed kid, then I might, tend to be. And this is your issue, Ollie, is that a lot of the people that you write about are older than you.
Yeah, well, that's one
It's a
thing.
funny thing because now you're at the other side. Like I sit and talk about a Penrith team that they're all 20 years old. For me, it's like,
Yeah.
if you meet them, you're like, oh, it's a nice 20-year-old kid.
Yeah.
But whereas when you're in high school looking up, you're, oh, wow, it's Nathan Cleary.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the thing I found, whether I'm interviewing players for an article for Everything Rugby League or I've got them on my podcast and that, the main thing I try to find out straight away is how I guess they perceive themselves and how I should be treating them. With some players, it's as simple as straight down to business. Okay, can I get you on for a podcast here? And that's all the chat, and we do the podcast, that's it. There are a couple of players who I've interviewed for ARL over a year ago who still get in contact with me, or it's not close or anything, like you don't message often, but there is that slight casual thing, and I guess that's just to do with personalities.
Yeah.
I find with players over in England, they're a lot more lackadaisical, as you could expect, whereas in the NRL, it's more business, which you understand. So I do get that in the sense that you got to kind of work people out. You don't want to overstep that boundary of trying to be too chummy because they are more famous than you. But then again, you don't want to go too far the other way where you're treating them as a celebrity. And
Absolutely.
You got to find, and it's different from person to person. You just got to find that balance.
I think if you talk to, as real people, and you're a real person, and you ask interesting questions, that's fine. But, you will get players who, have big heads and players who are stars and whatever. But, 90% of the time, most of the time, I think this is one of your questions, Adrian, the people I enjoyed working with, most of the time, they're very enjoyable. They're just really nice people. Luke Lewis is the loveliest person. You would hope that he would be a really nice person.
Yeah.
He is. He's just a lovely guy. Matty Rogers, you've seen him on Survivor and just the most down-to-earth guy. And I knew him when he was 26, and the poor guy's writing his biography as he was changing from league to union. He was a real down-to-earth guy. So those sort of guys I respond to very good. I haven't had the bums rush from too many people in or out.
Every ex-player, just about every ex-player I've dealt with is tremendous. They're really happy.
That's
I can't
different.
say every. I know, and there are a lot of them are different areas as well. But
some
a lot of ones we've had. Obviously, we did an hour and a half with Royce. He was great, and then sitting had beers with him.
But they love talking about the golden
recently
days.
I interviewed Steve Maven and Cole Bentley, and especially with Cole because he used to live in Cranebrook where I live. You have a 10-15 minute conversation before you actually start the interview, and it really relaxes you. It really gets you in the mood, and you sort of get a bit of a better interview out of it. A couple of the English blokes as well are the exact same who are still playing today. But again, I guess I'm just reiterating the point. It's sort of a personality thing, and it's not, if it's purely down to business, doesn't mean they've got a bad personality, but it just means that's what they want, and that's what you've got to provide, just getting straight down to business, whereas others, they want to be friendly, I guess. Yeah.
Look, I think the older players that I spoke to over the years who were, say, 10, 15, 20 years older than I was, they were all old school gentlemen, and they really appreciated the fact that you rang them up to talk about their career.
Yeah.
A couple of people didn't want to chat. It doesn't really matter who they were. Maybe I got them too late in their careers. I don't want to go back over that or whatever. Or maybe there's some underlying controversy. I don't want to go into that. But 99 times out of 100, they're all fantastic.
Last question that I'll throw out. Do you ever have any issue with sort of libelous stuff, or anywhere you go, oh, I don't want to publish that, I don't want to talk about that, or you just everyone's pretty good?
No, your radar pops up pretty quick. You know?
True crime, I mean.
Not your, especially true crime.
Well,
but,
even, look, there's a
but
lot
more
of,
footy.
there's a lot of true crime in football.
Yeah. Is that a question for the editor, or is it somewhere you just go, I won't touch that? Is it?
Oh, you've got to use your own judgment.
Yeah.
And usually, I did a biography, which I won't name, and the best 3 stories didn't go in the biography.
Yeah.
And the biography didn't sell.
Yeah.
But I knew it wouldn't, because the best stories didn't go in. If these stories had gone in, they would have been on the front page of the Daily Mirror, for 3 weeks. And you have an obligation if you're working with someone. I'm not trying to trap you or get you into trouble.
Yeah.
So, often you find yourself saying, well, we can't really share that story, or I don't think we should put that in, or whatever. But, usually what happens on tour and that sort of stuff, what players get up to, stays on tour, and some of it goes into a book, some of it doesn't.
Yeah.
But, we're not talking about killing anyone. We're talking about, fun and games that boys get up to when they're high on testosterone. So you've got to protect. Like, I edited a book with Benji Marshall, and it wasn't a rugby league book, it was a how to play rugby league book. And he wanted to put a few stories in there, and I'm going, no, mate, no. This is a kid's book.
Yeah.
No. And so I'm editing him as he's going, So, you can be the hero of your own story. But, I'm not the sort of writer that goes, fantastic, this is going to sell 50,000 books. Because you go, this player will never live this down.
And the thing is, too, if you release something like that and have one player be dirty on you, then you've got a ton. The word gets around, and then it's very hard to find someone who wants to talk to you in the future. So,
well, you don't double cross. Players. You get to know players in conversation, and the player might say, "Look, I don't want this to go in the book, but this is what really happened on tour. Why I got dropped. So you're not going to ride it and try and slip it through. You're going to say, well, how can we say it? What would you be comfortable with? So there's a lot of negotiation. But, those sort of riders don't last very long. One thing you have to be very careful of, and I found this out, when you're interviewing players, they go, I scored 2 tries in that grand final. You look up the records they did. Players I came on after 5 minutes in that test match. No, you came on for the last 5 minutes. Yeah. So you must check up.
I know park cricketers that still just like that.
Absolutely. So players tend to, I don't want to say exaggerate, but they tend to meld different things together.
Yeah.
And if you don't double check and do your due diligence, you can goose yourself.
Yeah.
And then.
Do you ever have after it all goes in, after you've submitted it, do you ever lay awake and go, I could have done this differently, or you just once it's in?
Absolutely. Or I spelt this person's name, or the book comes in. Murphy's Law in publishing, the first page you open up, there's a mistake. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
And my wife, who's an English school teacher, first thing she says, I found a mistake. Yeah. And I say, put it down. Don't talk. Don't even open it. Put it down. Because you just do, and that's what happens in publishing. But you don't want any clangers. Like I've had a couple of clangers. The biggest clanger I wrote, and it must have been the last thing I wrote. I wrote an encyclopedia of rugby league players.
Yeah.
And the week before it went to print, Andrew Johns made his debut.
Wow.
Oh. Yeah. and killed him.
Yeah.
And in the interview after it, they said, where'd you get your ability from? He goes, from my dad, Les Johns. And I put in the book, son of Les Johns, who was a Canterbury player.
Yeah.
And he was only G'ing him up. But by the time the book came out, we knew it was wrong.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe I wrote it. I couldn't believe it.
But then again, you didn't know at the time.
But that's there forever. Publishing is forever.
Yeah.
It's always there. But, lots of fun and games, lots of sleepless nights.
Yeah.
And the odd mistake or two.
As I said, you've been so generous to give us an hour and a half of your time. Anything you want to plug before you go? What's on the horizon of the Melbourne Cup book and
I think the book
on
Racehorse on Mortals will be a nice little book for Christmas. And Tony Loxley, of course, who is doing a book called Very Hard Men of the 1980s, and he's got a lot of old players from that era, Les Davidson and that to give their reminiscences. Tony's a good guy, and he's trying to self-publish when a lot of the big publishers aren't publishing this material anymore. Your only chance to get this material is to support publishers like Tony. So
Yeah.
I'm
And
happy,
that's
to,
what I've
happy to
learned
work with
both
him.
with him and Dan. It's essentially labour of love. They're not there to make money. They're just there to do something they're really passionate about. And
The idea
more
is
power
not to
them.
lose money.
Exactly.
And I'm
But-
sure we'll see you at that event too.
So,
when
yeah,
rules
yeah.
launch.
Every chance to be the
we'll
book
out
launch. So thank you so much for joining us. Al, we'll I'll kick back and have a quick chat and let everyone go. But thank you. Hopefully, if you want to come and join us on one of the weekly shows, you're more than welcome to come and talk 2 hours of actual footy.
Mate, you'll never get home if you get me start talking.
It's long enough already.
But a pleasure, guys, to talk, and thanks for the invitation again.
Thank you.